Good morning, Year 12. Thank you again for tuning in for our geography lesson today. As I pointed out, we'll be looking at the impacts of deforestation and some of the strategies, or rather the responses to deforestation. So I guess, yeah, some of the strategies that are being used. Apologize for my crazy hair. I've stopped doing my hair, I guess, as we've been in quarantine. But I suppose the good news, I'm filming this on Tuesday, after we find out that we are going back in 2 weeks. I'll be sure to get my hair in order for 2 weeks' time. So I'm actually going to keep this little, lecture quite short. So I'm hoping to keep it under 20 minutes. And allow you guys to do some reading. I did ask that you read ahead in preparation for this, so I'm basically going to give some summary points and give my explanation to things and go over some of the diagrams, and then I'll leave you with some questions. On our lesson for Friday, I'd then like to look at one of our case studies, Cameroon. So of course you can read ahead with that one, and we'll take about 2 periods to go over Cameroon, and yeah, we'll be well on our way. So as usual, I'll bring the keynote up on screen, and I'll talk you through that. So yeah, here goes. Okay, so just to reiterate the importance of forests. So we've got quite a bit of evidence that forests are pretty important, and I guess that's kind of common sense. But just in case you're questioning whether they were important or not, this will explain to you that they are quite important. So you'll need some information off page 116 and page 117, which is what I'm going through here. But most important, well, not so important, but importantly, the 14th World Forestry Congress took a look at, the state of the world's forests, and I guess wanted to reiterate to the world how important they actually are. And so part of their job was to come up with some goals for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And as part of coming up with some goals for that was just reiterating how important these forests are. So there is that little quote on page 117. Forests are more than trees and are fundamental for food security and improved livelihoods. The forests of the future will increase the resilience of communities by providing food, wood energy, shelter, fodder and fibre, generating income and employment to allow communities and societies to prosper, and harbouring biodiversity. They will support sustainable agriculture and human well-being by stabilising soils and climate and regulate water flows. I mean, that's the goal for them. Whether or not forests are actually being able to do that, not from a lack of trying on behalf of forests, but more so humans preventing forests from actually doing this. But this one quote, I guess, highlights how important forests are, because they do have the potential to provide all of those things. The one thing that stands out for me all the time is just the whole idea of food security. They are important in providing food security. However, as we've mentioned before, ensuring food security for humans, oftentimes that means the removal of forests. There can be some conflicts there, and just better trying to manage that. Just wanted to point out that, forests provide more than just timber. So if you read through, you would have noticed they said, water filtration and regulation. We've spoken about that lots of times, about how plants and trees are able to actually filter the water that goes through the soil and things like that. They actually can clean up an area. They're extremely useful in that sense. So, trees aren't just for building homes or providing firewood, and especially in developing countries, but they actually can filter, the bad stuff out of water, especially in developing nations as well, where they might be getting water from a well. So with trees nearby, that could potentially be filtering that water If you've ever heard of the disease cholera, people die a lot from that, and it's from drinking contaminated water, and it's mostly in developing countries. We don't have that problem. We can drink the water from our taps in Australia, but there's lots of places around the world where you can't drink from the tap. The other one there, carbon sequestration and climate stability. What I want to point out there is the fact that when you knock down a forest, when you knock down a tree, you're releasing carbon back into the atmosphere. And too much carbon, of course, is attributing to global warming or the rapid increase of warming of the planet. So by actually having more forests, you're actually capturing that carbon and lowering the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, which is going to eventually help with with global warming. And of course, the stabilization of the climate. Again, we've mentioned, especially for those that were with us in Unit 1, erosion control and the preservation of soil quality and habitats for fauna and flora. That erosion control, we know that if we clear a landscape of trees, you're then going to have some tectonic activity, perhaps, or geomorphological activity such as landslides. And of course flooding as well. So they're pretty important, although I'm pretty sure you all were aware of that. So, so I guess the other thing I wanted to point out here is that a lot of the benefits from having a forest are actually invisible economic benefits. So they provide all these environmental benefits and things like that, but it's what's called the invisible economy. So particularly in Asia and Africa. And the example that I have here, if you're looking at page 117, you'll see some women in Mali collecting firewood, and then on the right hand side you've got those forest mushrooms. I'll see if I can bring those pictures up for you. These are what I'm talking about when we say invisible economic benefits. So people have gone through and collected things and maybe have sold them on, and that forest has been able to provide it. The explicit example in the textbook is this one in West Africa. So you have about 4 million women in a very poor area of the world. They earn about 80% of their income from the collection, processing, and marketing of oil-rich nuts that are collected from shea trees and these occur naturally in the forest. So it's an informal aspect of a local economy. So you may not have countries in West Africa recognizing it as, like education or banking and finance as part of the economy, but 80% of their income are coming from that. So it's quite incredibly important. And so it may not actually be documented at a government level, but it's actually providing quite a bit of economic benefits. So very important. So what do the studies say on the importance of forests? So very quickly, they've just said economic value associated with maintaining intact forest ecosystems is often higher than the value derived from logging or conversion to farmland. What does that mean? It means by having the forest there, intact, not destroyed by humans, you could actually get much more economic value from it than if we were to chop down those trees and sell that wood or turn it to farmland. Like I've mentioned before, oftentimes forests are destroyed to make way for that farmland because that's going to make more money. But there is evidence that there potentially could be more economic value from leaving that forest there and implementing strategies to sustainably use that forest. So we talk a little bit about them a little bit later. Many benefits of forests are actually difficult or impossible to replace if lost. So that's quite important. Once that forest is gone, you can't get that benefit back, whatever that benefit may be. So it could be, like the shade trees, for example, may not necessarily be able to get that back. So if you go over to page 116, I'll see if I can bring it up on the screen now. And what you'll notice is you've got, so this is figure 8.16. It's the benefits of intact forest. So you've got environment, economic activity, and social conditions. So what is the benefit on the environment? What is the benefit on economic activity? And what is the benefit on social conditions? So having a look at those, these this is why it's important. So read through those, familiarize yourself with them, pause the video now if you need to, and jot those down. Now, if you've paused that and you're back, I want to ask you the question, which benefits do you think would be difficult to replace if lost? So, for example, if we were to look at forest filter, so this is environment, forest filter and regulate runoff and thus improve water quality and help control water flow. So if we were to get rid of that forest, we would have less filtration of that water, and obviously the water quality could actually decrease. Now, being able to go back to normal would mean planting that forest again. If you think back to the last couple of lessons we've had, planting forests can actually take a long time, and the damage may be done. You may have erosion. It's very, very difficult to come back from erosion. So go through those, and not everyone, but take some time to think about which of these benefits on here in these lists would be difficult to replace. And why do you think that? Tell me why. So this is a much better way of just rewriting the notes. Ask yourself this question and respond to some of those points. So you've got about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19. I think there's 19 points there. Don't do 19 of them. Maybe do like 4 or 5 of them, and explain to me and share that with me if you can. Okay, so population growth pushing deforestation. I think it's pretty clear now that the growth of the human race is really the main culprit for decimating forests or deforestation. So we know that there are natural factors, but natural processes, but they aren't contributing as much as what humans are doing. And it's that human population growth. Between the years of 1960 and 2000, the world population doubled. I just think that's incredible. We've gone from, I think it's about 3 billion to 6 billion in that time. We're at about 7.5 billion now. So we're increasing really, really rapidly. But I did read that we've kind of plateaued. Some other things, global economy grew 6 times larger. So more people have more money, although the distribution of that isn't equal, I guess. Food production grew 2.5 times, which is really interesting. The world population doubled and food production more than doubled. So that's really interesting. I think it says a lot about gluttonous countries, perhaps like the United States. Wood harvest grew 3 times. Timber reduction grew 2 times. So these kinds of factors are pushing deforestation. It's really important to remember. So the impacts, and the impacts are huge, but I only have a few dot points here to actually explain. Because I guess the impacts, we'll look at more detail when we look at our case study. So the impacts for the different regions that we look at, like Cameroon, for example, is going to be different. So this is just the overall ones, so a generalization. But ecosystems are being degraded faster than they can recover. And because of that, we've got a decline in the amount of species on the planet. So you might think to yourself, I'm sure you won't, you're all geographers, so you're all amazing environmentalists, but people in other classes might be like, no, who cares if we have a reduction in species? Think back to year 7 science, the food chain. By removing something from the food chain has a devastating impact on all the other species as well. The extinction rate, this is incredible, increased by 1,000% over the last few hundred years. So more and more species becoming extinct. Water quality is declining. And then in addition to that, because of the removal of those forests, flooding occurs more frequently, and the intensity or the magnitude of that flooding is increasing as well. So that, this is no good. The deforestation accounts for 10% of carbon emissions. Remember I talked about forest being like a carbon sink, so it holds that carbon. By knocking it down, you're releasing that carbon back into the atmosphere, and that is causing or attributing to global warming as well. And then lastly, like I mentioned before, once degraded, the social and economic benefits may never recover. So again, that activity that of course you have done as you pause the video before. So I guess after those generalized impacts, what are we actually doing to respond to it? So first and foremost, it's usually managed at a local and regional scale most of the time. So you won't have, the federal government looking after all forested areas in Australia, for example. It's often a local or a regional scale. So you might have a local council looking after an area, but oftentimes it will be a state. So looking at a region that are managing those forests. So that's here in Australia. It may be very different in other countries, especially those developing countries as well. National governments obviously do have a role to play, and that's often giving the policies and laws that guide the management of forests. It could also, I didn't type this up, but it could also be organizations that have come up with I guess, methods of maintaining or looking after these areas as well. So it might be professional associations that are giving advice on that. So despite deforestation occurring in, few large regions, so it's, not everywhere, but they're concentrated in certain places, Southeast Asia, South America, Africa. The key thing here is it's happening where governance is not always successful. So those government regulations may not be successful. Simply, there's a couple of things. Could be corruption, could be lack of, funds to actually ensure that protection. But they're often in developing countries. So like I said, developing countries, we call that spatial association with these poor areas, or if I'm being politically correct, I should say developing areas. And because of this, we're seeing deforestation, like we've explained before. It's the use of wood and non-wood forest products. That's ensuring that they have food security and alleviates poverty. So it's a really, really hard decision to make. Do we look after this forest, or do we allow a population to starve to death or live in squalor and poverty for the rest of their lives? We know that people that live in poverty have shorter life expectancies, don't have access or have limited access to education, and are more susceptible to disease and things like that. So it's a really, really difficult thing to navigate. If we say, well, no, sorry, we as a global community are saying you can't knock down this forest, but are we happy for them to starve to death? So what could we do? What can we do? What can we do in regard to that? Actually, this is probably a good point. Maybe pause the video, think about this. What do you think? Like if, I don't know, maybe in a couple of years' time, you are at the United Nations, you've got representing Australia and you're guiding the United Nations, whatever group they have in ending deforestation. And you have these poorer countries, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, say, oh, hang on there, Australia, you can't stop us from chopping down our trees because our people will starve to death. What are you going to suggest instead to manage that? What are you going to offer? Can richer countries do more to help out these poorer countries? This brings me to the Millennium Development Goals. I'm not sure how familiar you are with them. I know I've taught Millennium Development Goals in junior humanities previously when I've done geography. We use it quite a bit. So I'm not sure if you guys have seen this before, but this basically it was like all these things we need to do as a global community in the new millennium from year 2000 onwards. So it's not just on forestry, it's on literally everything. And one of the things that they mentioned in the Millennium Development Goals, again, pause the video and go look them up. You'll find a lot of really useful information, especially with Unit 4 coming up too. There's stuff on that. But you'll find they wanted to have a promotion of a sustainable use of forest rather than banning forestry. So the goals have said, look, you can't just ban forestry. We need to chop down trees. So how can we do it better? Let's have a sustainable use of these forests instead. So they put together some guidelines, I guess, on how we can actually sustainably use forests. The thing is, there are quite a few difficulties in ensuring these management guidelines are adhered to. So one of the first one I have there is illegal harvesting in remote sections. So a lot of forest products, or chopping down of trees for timber, whatever it might be, are often done in large tracts of land that are really remote and isolated. You may not actually know that it's being chopped down unless you had a satellite going over it. Ding, 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 GIS. So think about your GIS, Geographic Information Systems. So if you're on page 119, please read that. Can't ignore GIS, but I'm not going to go over it in this lesson. But please read that for me. The use of spatial technologies to address deforestation. That second one there is it's expensive. You can have these protections, but then you need the actual manpower to actually implement these management strategies. It's going to be expensive, especially look at the Amazon's huge. So how do you manage that whole area? It's so expensive. And should it be left up to Brazil to be, spending money on that? Should the whole globe do that? Respond to that for me. Write a little statement what you think. Corruption, unfortunately, is a huge one. So the forest sector is often corrupt and has poor management, especially in those developing countries. So you might have, someone come along and say, oh, it might be a company, say, look, we'll pay you off if you just let us secretly go in there and chop down trees, because they're not getting paid a lot, whoever's managing that forest. So it can be a lot of corruption, politicians, etc. And then lastly, just the difficulty in measuring the value of that informal forest sector. So like the African women getting the shea nuts from the trees. So how do you measure that? So yeah, it's hard to measure the true value of that. And so I guess at times those values are actually undervalued in the decision to chop down a forest. So that government in those West African countries might be quite happy to knock down those trees despite it providing 80% of the income for women. It may be undervalued. So yeah, that's really, really difficult. So to wrap up some of the strategies to respond to deforestation. So I've got a couple here. This is actually just straight from figure 8.19 on page 119, but I've just shortened them. So yeah, you're implementing sustainable harvest practices. So how can we, chop down trees without destroying that forest or having a reduction in the quality of forests? The monitoring, GIS, timber from plantations rather than native forests. We do this a lot in Australia. We will actually plant all of these forests rather than chopping down native trees. Can we do that more? It takes up a lot of land. Where is that land coming from? Protection of forests, obviously, as a state park, national park. Oh, this one I really like. Certification programs for ethically produced timber. Pause this video in a second and I want you to respond to this. Could this work? So what is it? Say I'm chopping down trees to build furniture. Now, there may be a more ethical way of doing this. So maybe I'm, chopping down one tree per square kilometer every, 5 years. That I'm just pulling that from the top of my head. And that might be the ethically produced timber, or it might be, using plantations where I pay minimum wage at least for the people working there. So having a certification for that, so your consumers can buy their timber products knowing that it was done ethically, produced ethically, they haven't contributed to deforestation. Pause the video, respond to that. Do you think people would buy into that? Okay, did you pause? Welcome back. Policies and laws. So obviously we can make a change by enacting those policies and laws. But of course, I ask you, how do we police them? Who's responsible for policing them? Answer that for me. Provide developing communities with alternative fuel and heat sources. Who would have thought? What if we actually, provided electricity to developing areas? Where they don't have to chop down trees to get
fuel and charcoal and heat their homes? What if we provide alternative measures for that? Why don't we invest in more solar panels, things like that? What do you reckon? Respond to that for me. Accurate assessment of informal forest economy. So like I said, let's actually figure out these informal economies. How much are they actually benefiting? Like how much are they contributing to the economy? So yeah, that monetary value placed on ecosystem services as well. So putting a price on these things. This forest is worth $6 billion. So we're not going to chop it down. Yeah, figuring out how I can put put a price on it. This one's really good. Pay landowners to maintain a forested area. So yeah, you might have a farmer who's got forests on his land, or whatever the person might be, but it might be an allowance from the government. So long as they keep that forest to a particular standard. Or it might be a community. You might be a community living in a forested area. That community may get benefits from the government for keeping that forest maintained. And then lastly, I've got that community-based management of forests. So oftentimes the people that are actually living there may see the value more so than, say, some city slicker. Or some CEO of a company that wants to chop down that forest. So you might actually find management of the forest might actually work best for the people that actually live there and actually benefit from that forest as well.
Okay, I think I went a little bit over, but I've kept it as short as I can with my explanation there. So I hope that was helpful for you. Now, I've popped up on Canvas the questions that I'd like you to answer. I asked you a lot of questions in that video as well. Please respond to them. Perhaps what I'll do is I'll put a discussion board up. Not everyone participates in the discussion board, but I really implore you all to give it a shot, please. Like I've said before, you want a 40 or above in this subject, you got to participate in those discussions. So respond to other people as well. So yeah, those questions I've just asked in the video, respond to them, type them up for yourself, throw them on the discussion board, please. I'm not going to force everyone to do that, but it would make this subject way more interesting if people would put those up to discuss. So yeah, please check the Canvas page for today. For the questions I've set out. So I'm going to be picking and choosing and creating a couple of questions myself. Now, to get you ready for our next lesson, like I said, I'd like to do a case study on Cameroon. So if you wanted to jump ahead, it's not the next one that there's... what one is that? That's Brazil. I'm not going to be looking at that, but the Cameroon one I really want to look at. So for Friday's lesson, make sure you read pages 124 all the way over to 127. I'll do a quick recap, and then we'll also have activities and questions for you to answer on the Friday, so less lecturing. Looking forward to seeing you all again really soon. I'll do a Zoom lesson next week. I find I stay on Zoom for so long. So I don't know, let me know how you think these are going, if you prefer these pre-recorded ones, because I know you can pause and things like that. I do like the pre-recorded because I can see there was only 11 views on the last video. So some of you haven't watched it, or maybe you were illegally gathering at each other's houses and watching it together. But of course, from midnight tonight, well, it'll be last night when you're seeing this, you actually can have some visitors over. So I hope you'll be safe when you are visiting people. If you're going to have people over, sanitize those hands, cough into your elbow, things like that. So yeah, I will send you out the next video on Friday. I'll be on the discussion boards. If you want to chat with me again, please, you're more than welcome to Zoom me. But of course you can jump onto gmail.com and use the Google Hangouts feature as well. I have that open on my computer at all times too. So yeah, thanks everyone. And because I'm on YouTube, do I say, don't forget to subscribe, smash that like button, and I will see you next time.